Hello, everyone, and welcome back to your Daily English Dose, your channel for improving your English while understanding the important events happening in our world. Today, we're looking at two major events that happened around the same time in late 2025. Donald Trump's return to the ASEAN Summit and a surprising ceasefire agreement between Thailand and Cambodia. Are these two events connected? Let's explore the background, the drama, and what it all means for Southeast Asia and the world. We'll start by looking back at Trump's first term as U.S. president and how he dealt with ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. His approach was quite different from previous U.S. presidents. Trump's main policy was America first. This meant he preferred making deals one-on-one with countries instead of working within large groups. One of his first big moves was pulling the U.S. out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP. This was a huge trade deal, and his decision was a big shock, especially for ASEAN countries like Singapore, Vietnam, and Malaysia that were part of it. Instead of big regional deals, his government focused on smaller, bilateral agreements called TIFAs, Trade and Investment Framework Agreements. The idea was to use America's economic power to get better deals in direct negotiations. While this might have led to faster deals sometimes, many felt it weakened efforts towards regional economic unity. Another issue during Trump's presidency was his inconsistent attendance at important ASEAN meetings. Sometimes he attended, sometimes he didn't. This was often seen by ASEAN leaders as a sign that the U.S. didn't care much about the region. Traditionally, the U.S. president showing up at these meetings is a big symbol of America's commitment to Southeast Asia's stability and success. When this commitment seemed uncertain, trust in the U.S. as a reliable partner decreased significantly. This created an opportunity for China, which was steadily increasing its influence in the region. Okay, time for our first everyday English check. Let's look at the phrase deal with. This means to handle or manage a situation, problem, or person. It's super common. You might say, I need to deal with some emails, or how do you deal with difficult customers? Another useful word is bilateral. It simply means involving two groups or countries. While it's often used in politics, bilateral agreement, you could talk about a bilateral discussion between two departments at work. However, not everything was negative for ASEAN during Trump's first term. The trade war between the U.S. and China actually created some unexpected benefits for Southeast Asia. Because the U.S. put high tariffs, taxes, on goods imported from China, many international companies, including some Chinese ones, moved their factories out of China and into ASEAN countries to avoid these tariffs. This shift, sometimes called friendshoring or simply companies diversifying their supply chains, led to a big increase in investment in countries like Vietnam, Thailand, and Malaysia. As a result, trade between the U.S. and ASEAN actually grew, and ASEAN became an even more important hub in global supply chains. This shows the complex and sometimes unintended consequences of Trump's policies. What about security? Even though Trump sometimes seemed uninterested in ASEAN diplomacy, his administration did continue some security activities. Particularly in the South China Sea, the U.S. maintained and even increased Freedom of Navigation Operations, or FONOPs. These are naval patrols designed to challenge China's claims and actions in the disputed waters and to show U.S. commitment to keeping the sea lanes open. However, this military engagement happened at the same time as the perceived lack of high-level political engagement, sending mixed signals to ASEAN countries. It suggested that while the U.S. was still interested in regional security, its approach might be unpredictable. So what can we expect from Trump in 2025 at the ASEAN Summit? Looking at how he behaved at past G7 summits might give us clues. He often disrupted the usual harmony at these meetings. For example, he clashed with leaders over tariffs, suddenly withdrew from joint statements, suggested Russia should rejoin the group, and even left meetings early. These actions show his style: disruptive, focused on getting attention, prioritizing messages for his supporters back home, and seeking specific bilateral wins rather than group consensus. This pattern suggests he might take a similar transactional and unpredictable approach at the ASEAN Summit. Let's have another everyday English check. The phrase mixed signals is very useful. It means giving someone contradictory or confusing messages about your intentions or feelings. He sends mixed signals. Sometimes he's friendly, sometimes he ignores me. Another good one is clash with. This means to have a serious disagreement or argument with someone. The manager often clashed with the employees over deadlines. Based on his past actions and campaign ideas, here's what Trump might demand. First, new tariffs. He has suggested broad tariffs of 10% to 20% on all imports and maybe even 60% on goods from China. ASEAN countries could easily be targets, especially those with large trade surpluses with the U.S. Second, pressure on China. He will likely push ASEAN nations to take a tougher stance against China. This would put ASEAN countries in a very difficult spot, caught between their biggest trading partner, China, and their main security partner, the U.S. Third, a transactional view of security. He might treat U.S. security guarantees not as a public good, but as a service that allies need to pay for or provide something in return for. This could fundamentally change the nature of alliances. How will ASEAN react to such an unpredictable leader? Their strategy will likely be based on a delicate balancing act. ASEAN countries want the U.S. to stay involved in the region as a counterweight to China's growing influence. But they are also very careful not to get caught in the middle of a direct conflict between the U.S. and China. So, they will likely welcome U.S. engagement but be cautious about Trump's demands, trying to maintain their own strategic independence. In this environment, the idea of ASEAN centrality becomes more than just a diplomatic slogan. It's a survival mechanism to prevent the region from being torn apart by great power competition. ASEAN will try hard to set its own agenda for the region, rather than having it dictated by Washington or Beijing. The successful ceasefire agreement between Thailand and Cambodia is a perfect example of ASEAN demonstrating this centrality. Let's have an everyday English check. Delicate balancing act is a great idiom. It refers to a situation where you need to carefully handle competing needs or demands. Managing work and family life is a delicate balancing act. Another key term is counterweight. This means a weight that balances another weight. Metaphorically, it's a force or influence that balances or offsets another. ASEAN sees the U.S. as a counterweight to China's power. ASEAN countries learned from Trump's first term about the risks of depending too much on one country. So, they will continue to hedge their bets economically. This means deepening economic ties within ASEAN itself, while also strengthening partnerships with other powers, like Japan, India, and the European Union. This diversification helps reduce risk in an uncertain geopolitical climate. This highlights a fundamental tension for ASEAN. Trump's first term, especially the U.S.-China trade war, unintentionally boosted ASEAN's importance as a supply chain hub as companies moved production out of China. But the same person, with his unpredictable tariff policies, now poses perhaps the biggest threat to that prosperity. If Trump imposes universal tariffs, the export-driven ASEAN economies that benefited before could be directly hit. So Trump's presence at the summit represents both the architect of recent economic opportunities and the biggest potential threat to their continuation. Now let's shift focus to the other major event, the ceasefire agreement between Thailand and Cambodia. This wasn't a sudden development, but the latest chapter in a long, deeply felt conflict. The roots go back over a century, to maps drawn by French colonial authorities in the early 1900s. The core issue is a disagreement between the internationally recognized border on the French maps, which Cambodia supports, and the natural watershed line in the Dangrek Mountains, which Thailand claims. This map dispute has been a source of tension for over 100 years. At the heart of the conflict is the Preah Vihear Temple, an 11th century Khmer temple. For both countries, it's a powerful symbol of national pride and historical grievance. For Cambodia, it represents the glory of the ancient Khmer Empire. For many Thais, it symbolizes territory they believe was unjustly taken by French colonial pressure. This emotional weight explains why the conflict can escalate so quickly. It's not just about land, it's about national identity. The conflict turned violent between 2008 and 2011. The trigger was Cambodia successfully registering the Preah Vihear Temple as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2008. In Thailand, this was seen as an attempt by Cambodia to solidify its claim over disputed surrounding areas, leading to nationalist protests and pressure on the Thai government and military. From 2008 to 2011, there were repeated armed clashes between the two armies, including artillery duels and small arms fire. These clashes caused dozens of deaths on both sides and forced tens of thousands of civilians to flee their homes. This period showed the real danger and human cost of the dispute. Even back in 2011, ASEAN played a key role in mediating the conflict, with Indonesia, the chair at the time, taking the lead. ASEAN proposed sending observers to the border and encouraged dialogue. This set a precedent for ASEAN involvement, supporting its role in the 2025 ceasefire agreement. Let's pause for another everyday English check. The word grievance means a real or imagined wrong or other cause for complaint or protest. The employees presented their grievances to the management. Another good verb is trigger. It means to cause an event or situation to happen. The announcement triggered a wave of protests. It's like pulling the trigger of a gun. The 2025 ceasefire agreement, reached on July 28 in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, came after renewed tensions in mid-2025. There had been military buildups, a shooting incident where a soldier died, and economic retaliation like border crossing restrictions. This recent friction created urgency for a diplomatic solution. The key points of the agreement were: it was immediate and unconditional, taking effect at midnight on July 28, highlighting the urgency. It established mechanisms to reduce tension, like meetings between local military commanders and restarting a joint border committee, GBC. This creates channels for direct communication to prevent accidental clashes. It also included the possibility of an ASEAN-led monitoring mission, reaffirming ASEAN's role as a guarantor of peace. However, this is just a ceasefire, not a final peace treaty. Many unresolved issues remain, like formally demarcating the border, clearing landmines, and tackling cross-border online scam operations. Without addressing these root problems, the peace remains fragile. This conflict is often driven by a feedback loop. Domestic political pressures in Thailand, from nationalist groups, military influence, lead to aggressive actions at the border, which then provoke Cambodian nationalism, leading to escalation. This cycle can often only be broken by outside mediation, like ASEAN's. Now let's connect these two stories. Why did the Thai-Cambodian ceasefire happen just before Trump arrived at the ASEAN Summit? Was it just a coincidence? The analysis suggests it was likely a calculated move by ASEAN. ASEAN is currently facing challenges to its unity and effectiveness. The ongoing crisis in Myanmar since the 2021 coup has revealed deep divisions among member states and the limits of ASEAN's non-interference principle. ASEAN has also struggled to present a united front against China in the South China Sea, with progress on a binding code of conduct being very slow. In this context of perceived weakness, successfully mediating the Thai-Cambodian conflict is a significant diplomatic win for ASEAN. It allows ASEAN to show the world that its approach, the ASEAN way, emphasizing consensus and peaceful resolution, still works. It demonstrates ASEAN's ability to manage regional problems without outside powers intervening. And importantly, it allows ASEAN to reassert its relevance and centrality just as a potentially skeptical U.S. president arrives. While Trump's presence didn't directly cause the ceasefire, the prospect of a disruptive U.S. administration likely created a sense of urgency for regional stability. An ongoing conflict between two members would project an image of a weak and divided ASEAN, making the bloc more vulnerable to Trump's potential divide-and-conquer tactics. By resolving the conflict, ASEAN leaders could approach the summit with greater solidarity, strengthening their collective bargaining position. This timing also allows ASEAN to contrast its peaceful conflict resolution model with the great power rivalry dominated by the U.S. and China. The ceasefire serves as a real-time example of an alternative approach to international relations. So the ceasefire can be seen as a deliberate performance orchestrated by ASEAN. Facing a credibility deficit due to Myanmar and the South China Sea, and with a high-profile summit putting a global spotlight on the region, ASEAN leadership, led by Malaysia, pushed for a resolution to the Thai-Cambodian conflict, a manageable problem compared to the others. Achieving the ceasefire right before the summit solved a dangerous conflict, addressed the credibility issue with a concrete success, and strengthened ASEAN's diplomatic standing with the U.S., China, and the world. It was a skillful move turning a regional crisis into a strategic opportunity. What happens next? There are different possibilities. Scenario 1. Trump's approach deepens U.S.-China rivalry, forcing ASEAN countries to choose sides and destroying consensus. Scenario 2. ASEAN successfully uses the ceasefire momentum to navigate great power competition, attracting investment without becoming a pawn. Scenario 3. The Thai-Cambodian ceasefire holds, but underlying issues remain unresolved, risking future flare-ups. Let's have our final everyday English check. The idiom pawn in chess is the least powerful piece. Metaphorically, a pawn is a person or group used by others for their own purposes. He felt like a pawn in their political games. Another useful word is flare-up. This means a sudden outburst or worsening of something, like violence, anger, or a medical condition. There was a flare-up of fighting in the region. Or, stress can cause a flare-up of her skin condition. This fascinating convergence of events, Trump's disruptive return and ASEAN's diplomatic success, tells a complex story about Southeast Asia at a crossroads. Understanding it in English helps you grasp not only the events themselves, but also the language of international relations, diplomacy, and regional dynamics. Remember the everyday English we explored: deal with, bilateral, mixed signals, clash with, delicate balancing act, counterweight, grievance, trigger, pawn, and flare-up. Thank you for joining us on your daily English dose. If this analysis helped your English and gave you insight into global affairs, please hit that like button. Your support is vital. What do you think about the timing of the ceasefire? Was it a strategic move by ASEAN? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and suggest other world events you'd find interesting to learn about. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell so you catch our next English learning adventure. Until next time, keep practicing, stay informed, and keep learning. Bye for now.